live.
We talk about the free agency rumors specifically surrounding PJ Washington, and then we will give you our official thoughts on the end of Summer League, all today on Locked On Hornets.
We're Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
In a minute, cuz we live.
It's Locked On Hornets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Thanks for making us your first listen. We're free and available anywhere you get your pods, and that does include YouTube, where you can see us going Hive Live edition right now. Go check us out, Locked On Hornets on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com/promo code Locked On, and you can go check them out, and we appreciate their sponsorship as always. That is Doug Branson. You can find his Substack, everyhornetsboxscore.com. You can listen to me every weekday on WFNZ from 12 to 3 p.m. All right, I got all the plugs in, Doug. Now we can go to what was a pretty eventful weekend for the Charlotte Hornets, especially on Friday. We got the Jake Fisher report. Do your thing, Jake Fisher.
We're going fishing. Oh, looks like we got a big one. It's a topo big one because we're live, baby.
It is. It is a topo big one, and it was the actual headline on what was an NBA free agency update. The headline, it did revolve around the Charlotte Hornets with PJ Washington. What do you make of this latest report, and why don't you tell the people on what Jake Fisher was talking about with the free agency news surrounding PJ?
Well, I think the big news was that Washington, according to Jake Fisher, has not drawn an offer from the Charlotte Hornets that reaches the level that we saw Isaiah Stewart, otherwise known as Beef Stew, get from the Detroit Pistons. That deal was $16 million per. Now, if you've been watching this podcast, you and I think, both speculated that the number that Charlotte was handing PJ and that PJ was refusing to sign was somewhere in the like 13 to 15 range, that we didn't think it was even 16, or at least I didn't think it was even 16. So this doesn't come as a surprise to me necessarily, but it is an interesting confirmation as his free agency continues to linger. And the longer it lingers, the longer, or at least the better the odds are that he gets signed and traded as opposed to signed at this point.
It does. And so with the $16 million annually, Doug, look, I guess my valuation on PJ is different than what Charlotte has. I don't know if this is, when you want to compare Isaiah Stewart and the type of money that he brings in, different position, younger guy that they drafted, so they decided to keep a guy in-house. Ian Stewart is just kind of the example that we're all rolling with because it's somewhere along the same lines of the money that we expect PJ to get. But, Doug, for me, if you wanted to really debate whether PJ was worth $20 million annually or not, okay, I get that. I mean, that's a lot. It's a good bit of money going to PJ, especially if you don't think he's the third best player on a title contending team or a playoff contending team, whatever definition you want to roll with. That's fine. $16 million seems more than fair, in my opinion. I think that's more than fair, and yet the Hornets haven't reportedly given him that kind of offer. If your whole role, this goes back to what you've been talking about. If the whole plan was to bring back Miles Bridges and PJ Washington in free agency with the idea that you might bring back Dennis Smith Jr., who also, the Hornets reportedly made an offer that was more than $2.5 million, but he wanted to go with the Nets. Maybe we can talk about that in a moment. But if that's your plan, and then you're quibbling over $16 million a year, where, Doug, it even looked like they might have offered PJ $15 million annually, a little bit more than the mid-level exception. The salary cap is going to raise every single season. This is a fair contract now. It will only be more fair if PJ would agree to 16 and you feel like that's still a little too high. That's where I'm going to get frustrated. It just seems like this is harder than it needs to be. And you're negotiating, playing hardball, drawing a hard line in the sand that isn't really needed. This is my opinion on it. What's yours?
Yeah, your priority as an organization was to re-sign your own free agents. And because that was your priority, you eschewed other options in free agency in terms of going out and competing for other teams' free agents or unrestricted free agents. You lost Dennis Smith Jr. because he wasn't a priority, because another team came in and said, actually, Dennis Smith Jr., you're our priority. Day one, we're going to give you a contract. The Hornets reportedly offered him more money, and DSJ said, I would like to go to the team that actually called me day one. So you've sacrificed all of these things, and yet it seems like the team wants to make that a priority, but at the same time wants the market to dictate what that player is worth. And the market has dictated, because he hasn't gotten any other offers that have been $16 million, certainly not $20 million. He hasn't gotten any of these offers that then the Hornets would have to match. That hasn't happened. And so the Hornets feel like they're in the catbird seat at this point. And yeah, I don't necessarily blame them because, you look at these two situations with Beef Stew and PJ, and I think they are different because Detroit sees Isaiah Stewart as being like a starter level player for them in the short and long term. Whereas the Hornets are trying to sign PJ Washington to play a reserve role in the short term and could be a reserve role in the long term. I don't know if they see PJ as like a starter level player in the long term, because like his offensive stats, if you look at it, have essentially plateaued. He hasn't necessarily gotten better each year. He's done different things each year and shown you, hey, I can do this, I can do that, I can do this. But not necessarily like raise his efficiency level all that much year to year, other than 21, 22 when the entire offense was humming. So, I think the Hornets are probably reticent to pay a player a lot of money that hasn't necessarily shown that, the stats are necessarily ascending.
Yeah, I mean, and you know how I feel about the offensive stats, especially in 21 and 22. If that's the role that you want him to play, it looked more so like the team that you're going to roll with for the future. And that was PJ's most efficient year. Oh, yeah, and he was maybe your best defensive player, especially with Mark not being a part of it, where you had him going all over the place, guarding a bunch of different players. So bottom line to me, if I think he can get back to 36% shooting. If we're just asking for him to get to his career, right? Career stats, 36.6% shooting from three, 45 from the field. If you can promise me that on top of all of the defensive ability that he has, that guy is a $16 million a year player. And if the Hornets if nobody else is giving him that, I would argue free agency's played out a little bit. I would argue that, Dallas wanted to pay Grant. They didn't have a ton of cap space. It was $13 million in a sign and trade type of scenario. They wanted to get him for cheaper. Fine. PJ is possibly going to go to unrestricted free agency. I don't like the idea of Gordon, PJ, Miles, none of those guys being locked up. And then do you trust this? I guess this front office isn't going to be here. So I guess we'll see what's going to happen on the other end, which I do think is a big part of this. As we kind of go into one last point, Doug, I wonder how much of a mandate there is from new ownership and how much they're abiding by that to not take care of anything long-term in free agency. Bobby Marks did say that would be a lot harder to do as ownership is changing hands. The draft, you got to roll with it, pick whoever you want. But with free agency, maybe new ownership doesn't want anything to happen long-term.
Well, maybe they want, if it's essentially, hey, if something's going to happen long-term, let the market dictate what that salary is going to be. Essentially, we all know, because we've been following this team for a long time, that if they want players, whether it's unrestricted free agents or sometimes even their own free agents, that small and mid-market sized teams have to overpay. It is your advantage. Your advantage is not, hey, come for the sunshine, come for the tax relief, come for the championship contention. Charlotte can't offer any of that. All they can offer is cold, hard cash. And when you're talking about your own free agents, it's an extra advantage because you have certain rights and certain years and certain dollar amount more that you can offer those players than other teams. But if this new ownership group is saying, hey, maybe let's not do that unless the market says, hey, you have to do that. No other team came in, and teams did it for other players. They did it for Grant Williams. They've done it for other players where they've offered, contracts and poison pill, type of stipulations to try to get teams not to match. That happened with Tybal. And teams have said, all right, fine, you put all those things in there, but we're going to match anyway. I think the Hornets would have done the same thing. Had somebody come along and offered PJ $17 million, $18 million and put in some provisions, I think the Hornets still would have said, look, This was our priority. You called our bluff, and now we're going to match it. But since no other team did that, honestly, I think it's kind of the smart play to say, hey, look, no other team did that. We're gonna keep our options open here.
Do you feel that way if he ends up signing the qualifying offer, that it was the smart play?
Well, we'll have to see how he plays this season. And he's going to be playing in a reserve role. So if he's not going to be a starter, but pending, some kind of injury, then I don't think his market is necessarily going to be drastically different next season than it would have been in this previous season when he had a much bigger role than he's had since he's been in Charlotte. So yeah, I still think it would be, and it keeps to me, it keeps your options open at that point, because then, if this new ownership group comes in and wants to be aggressive for other people's free agents, then you don't have longer term money on the books, and you can go out and make some different moves. So yeah.
The thing about the qualifying offer, after all of the trade reports that were coming in, and then he leaves for nothing after 1 year, I'd be pretty frustrated. I would be, with the Charlotte Hornets having decided to keep him for one more year and then not gotten anything for him when there were plenty of trades reported, and that was hot stuff. Then I'd be frustrated. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with PJ as this closes out.
I totally understand. And if you were telling me that Michael Jordan and Mitch Kupchak were going to be the people that were leading this organization a year from now, 2 years from now, some undetermined amount of time, I think I'd be right on board with you. But to me, having new people coming in, hopefully to invest more money, to inject some life into this organization, that being the case, I'm more open-minded about, pursuing different avenues than feeling like you have to keep your own free agents that have, look, PJ hasn't even been close to like all-star level numbers either. I think that changes the calculus for me too. If we're talking about
not asking for all-star money either, but right. I mean, that's true.
Right. But what I'm saying is I don't even see like the potential to get there. So to me, that puts a ceiling on like my sort of, hey, this team really has to go out and do whatever it takes to bring this player back. I wish this organization wouldn't have come out and said that at all, that, hey, we're prioritizing bringing back Miles Bridges and PJ Washington and putting blinders on and limiting their options. But that's the situation we're in. They've put themselves in that box, and now this presents an opportunity to maybe start to crawl out of that box, and I'm okay with that.
Let's look at some of the comments, Doug. Do you have any live chat comments coming in on PJ or anything else about the Hornets?
I would say more people in the chat agree with you. They don't want to see PJ walk for nothing. No one does, though. No one ever wants to see free agents walk for nothing. And yet then when teams go and overpay to keep those mediocre players, and the Hornets have a history of doing that, that to me, that's more damaging. More damaging is to invest more money, lock up your books in players that are meh, mid, as the kids are saying. To me, that's more dangerous because, and what it is, it's a silent problem too, because it's one and then you add another and then you add another, and you can't really isolate one particular contract, but you have to look at sort of adding those all together. When you invest in a bunch of meh players, you end up with a meh team. And so, it's much easier to say, well, I don't want to let him walk for nothing than to say, well, hey, let's not pay a bunch of mid players. But a lot of people here agree with you. They want to see, hey, $16 million doesn't sound like a lot of money. Go out and invest in this guy.
All right, let's talk a little bit more about that on the other side. We can also talk about another front court player coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets.
The camera's still on me, but you can talk.
We'll get to Brandon Miller. And you want me to talk over you?
Yeah,
okay.
I'll pretend I'm you. No, I'll get you.
Okay, that's fine. We'll talk about Brandon Miller and his summer league performance in just a moment. This episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is a fantasy sports website or app where you can pick 2 to 6 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 25 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available, and they offer projections on really any sport you watch. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. You also have safe and fast withdrawals, and they're currently operational in over 30 states and Canada as well. Download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com. Sign up and play daily fantasy sports. Do it. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. If you deposit $100, they give you $100. If you deposit $50, they give you $50. You get the idea. Don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. More Locked On Hornets coming up next.
Is Locked On Hornets.
Mitch Kupchak, will he do the thing that he has not done in season this entire
Anything.
time?
The thing that he has not done
It
is
always
anything.
comes back to do something.
Just do one thing.
You need to get a stick from outside and become the meme in person because it always comes back to do something.
Do something.
It's time for more of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
All right, speaking of a crowded front court, at least in the short term, it doesn't seem like it's going to be that long term. Miles Bridges will be an unrestricted free agency after his qualifying offer year is all done. Gordon Hayward not going to be coming back after his contract is off of the books at the end of next year. And now it looks like maybe even PJ Washington won't be on this squad. But Brandon Miller, that is someone you have invested in. You chose him second overall. Doug, we don't have any more summer league to go over. And so we can talk a little bit more about those observations of what happened with Brandon Miller. They eventually shut him down after a really good performance in his last outing, by far his best summer league performance. But you want to talk a little bit more about his performance on the Podcast P podcast with Paul George, his GOAT, his idol. And also Brandon Miller put out a TikTok. Like there's a couple of things surrounding Brandon Miller here that actually don't involve summer league at all.
He's in the news, folks. Yeah, he did go on Paul George's podcast. Of course, he said Paul George was his GOAT of basketball, so he gets an opportunity to go on Paul's podcast. There wasn't a ton of interesting things. You could tell that Brandon Miller was a little bit starstruck. He seemed a little bit extra laid back on the podcast, trying to just not. I think now, after the TikTok thing and after saying Paul George was a GOAT and people got on him a little bit, I think you can already see him being a little bit more careful with the things that he says. But one of the more interesting things that I thought we got from the podcast, which just aired today at like 1 o'clock, 12 o'clock, he said that LaMelo Ball was texting him the entire night of the draft saying basically, "You're a Hornet," before the pick was ever made. So that's kind of interesting, right? Did LaMelo, it begs the question, did LaMelo have some inside access? Did he know for sure that Brandon Miller was going to be the pick? Which means that maybe that decision didn't run up all the way to the very end of the process, that maybe after that second workout, Brandon Miller, for his part, said he didn't know. He didn't know for sure he was going to be the pick until they made the phone call to him right before his name was called to tell him he was the pick. But LaMelo Ball was texting Brandon Miller a lot, wasn't texting Scoot. So LaMelo, obviously a big fan of Brandon.
Well, and this is something we had kind of seen, and maybe the Hornets alluded to it with some of the coverage they would show after the fact, right? I know you called it an anti-fan move when they decided to not release the draft video at the time. They did release it afterwards. LaMelo Ball was in the gym. And so there was some kind of hints that LaMelo hit it off with Brandon. I think Brandon even had some comments about LaMelo being there, being supportive, cool guy to hang out with, if I'm not mistaken. I think he had some of those comments. And so, yeah, you could take it as LaMelo just gassing up a guy that he really liked as a potential person to select their number 2 overall. Or maybe LaMelo really did know, and he was talking with Mitch Kupchak and anybody that had any idea about who they were going to take number 2. So interesting communication there.
Well, it would have been awkward, right? If he was texting him that, and then Brandon Miller was not the pick and LaMelo Ball did not have any inside access, then I think their relationship would have been pretty awkward. So if you're asking me to speculate, then I would speculate that the decision was not right down to the wire, that they knew they were going to take Brandon Miller sometime before the draft pick was made, and LaMelo had caught wind that was going to be the pick. And I think LaMelo Ball should be happy because Brandon Miller is a better fit and won't threaten LaMelo Ball's place as like lead guard, ultimate ball handler on this team. Even though, I think Miller will develop into a player that you can ask to handle the basketball and to make plays for others in the short term, but also in the future as well. I think that'll only grow as a part of his game. But Scoot was ready to do that day one. And so you won't have any of that awkwardness. I think LaMelo Ball is probably happy about that because, look, LaMelo Ball is already dealing with, he's healthy, but getting back, and improving on some of the things that he has to improve on. This is one less thing that he has to like worry about in terms of fit, because Miller's probably coming off the bench. Like, it's not even going to be like a starter situation, at least early on. So it's just one less thing for LaMelo to worry about.
All right, so some other things that we know about Brandon Miller being in the news. It's about another TikTok video that he released. What's
you
the
do
TikTok video?
Are you a TikToker? Are you a TikToker?
I'm not a TikToker. No, I do not. I think I created an account one time to view a video that somebody sent me just so I could watch it, but that's the only reason I have a TikTok. I am not on the app at all. In fact, I can't even tell you the last time I ever went on.
I don't have it either, but somebody put me on this. They said, hey, check this thing out from Brandon Miller.
Well, and Twitter will have a lot of these too, and other social media sites, so that's how I'll see them.
Yeah. So, all right. So this is Brandon Miller picking a starting five through some kind of, TikTok thing. Anyway, here it is.
The filters, yeah.
Yeah, here it is.
Johnny, keep it.
So it's a keep one of these.
I'll keep Zach Levine.
Whoa!
Sure.
Zach Levine over Jimmy?
Keep it Dan. Keep it Dan.
All right, this is not great for the non-YouTube
Giannis,
audience
Giannis,
that's only
sure.
listening, but he's picking a whole bunch of players, and, well, you'll hear why it's in the news now.
I don't know these two.
Okay, I'm going to pause it there for the audio, for the audio listeners. So he doesn't, the two that he doesn't know, small forward, it's obviously Chris Middleton. I don't know who the center is. Is that Isaiah Hartenstein? I don't know who the center is. So
I can't see it based off the view that I have, the box that you put me in when we do these broadcasts, but maybe it's Hartenstein. I can't see it very well.
Okay, but the guy that is small forward is obviously Chris Middleton. All right, let's keep going.
Okay.
No, I can't see. Hey, I'll keep the small forward, whoever that is. Oh yeah, that's my five right there.
Okay, so he also goes on to say that he doesn't know who his center is, which is Jonas Valanciunas. And again, I'm willing to give him Jonas Valanciunas because I think the thing that we have to discuss here is what is the responsibility of Brandon Miller, a player that knows he's about to be drafted pretty high up in the NBA draft. What is the responsibility of that player to know what level are you saying, all right, you got to know who this player is, and what level are you like, all right, you can learn?
Well, I mean, I think LaMelo might be someone in this category. LaMelo has talked about, he knows who Chris Middleton is, let's be clear. But LaMelo, when he was coming out of the draft, and even in the last couple of years, when people would ask, hey, is there anybody you try to model your game after, or who was one of the players that you grew up watching? LaMelo doesn't seem to like watching basketball. I think he said that outright, that he doesn't watch basketball like that, but he loves to be in the gym. He loves to be on the court. And so LaMelo is somewhat in this same regard here, Doug. And LaMelo, he's turned out okay, I would say, not having known maybe who a Chris Middleton or Jonas Valanciunas was.
Well, that's so a couple of good points there. I think that, look, these are 19-year-olds that are getting drafted. These are young people. These are Gen Zers. And I think the NBA is trying to confront a problem that Gen Zers don't watch the games like millennials did and like Gen X did before them. They actually watched the games. They knew the rosters. They knew the players. And Gen Zers watch highlights now. And they know the major players, the ones that are generating those highlights. Those are the Paul Georges, the LeBron Jameses, the Anthony Davises. They know the major players, but these kind of guys that are your second, third tier options on championship teams, they don't even know those guys because they're not paying attention. And I think more so for players that are part of big time college programs or are major prospects, they are spending a lot of time doing other things. And they probably, look, I spend a lot of time talking about basketball. It's why I don't watch. I watch a lot of Hornets games, but I'm not going to watch a ton of basketball outside of that because I talk a lot about it. I'm invested in a lot of it. And so, and I don't watch a lot of sports outside of it. I watch a little soccer here and there. But so I think these guys play video games, they have other interests. And so I give them a little bit of leeway in that respect. But what's interesting, Walker, is that he's interviewed at Summer League, and the interviewer brings this up to him. And instead of doubling down and saying, I didn't know who that was. Now I do. They told me it was Chris Middleton. Yeah, whatever. And he instead says, I was trolling the media. I knew who that was.
Okay.
So after watching that video, do you think he was trolling? Because Chris Middleton was a player that was pretty popularly used as a sort of floor for Brandon Miller's game. Like, all right, if he just sort of does the bare minimum, he can become Chris Middleton. If he does even more than that, he becomes Jason Tatum. That's ceiling floor. So do you think he was trolling a little bit here?
I mean, I guess. I want to know what the trolling process was, like not picking, or so knowing who Zach LaVine is, knowing who Jimmy Butler is, but I will pull the troll job off at not knowing who Chris Middleton is. Okay. I don't know, man. Like maybe he didn't. And then he just decided maybe he's trolling the media by saying he likes trolling the media. Maybe that's the actual play here. So maybe it's just super inception trolling from Brandon Miller.
You know that I own a lot of caps. I'm a cap man. And so if anybody's going to...
All caps. Got it.
Right. So, but if anybody's going to know cap, it's going to be me. And I'm going to call Major Cap here. I think he definitely did not know who Chris Middleton was. I think he was trying to cover it up by saying he was trolling the media, which to me doesn't even make any sense because this was like his own TikTok thing. It wasn't like he wasn't like being interviewed by a local news station and given this challenge where then he had to sort of tongue in cheek say like, oh, I don't know who Chris Middleton is. Like there's no context there. I think this is clearly a situation where, just like the Paul George thing, he kind of got caught a little bit and then tried to backpedal it. Look, he is, 19 years old. He's very out front in the media, and he's probably going to have to take a couple of these hits as he sort of learns, how to be. And this isn't I don't know that the media really picked up on this. It's just a lot of fans looking at this and going, wait a minute, this guy doesn't know who Chris Middleton is. So it's interesting. I don't think it's a big deal that he doesn't know who Chris Middleton is.
Now, you said 19 years old. Does it matter that he'll be 21? He's actually 20.
He's 20. Yeah, he's 20 years old. Yeah.
Does it matter that he'll be 21 in November? Does that age? Is the 19?
I get stuck on 19 because so many of these guys are 19 years old. No, it doesn't. It doesn't matter because I think that a lot of these guys come into the league and then they learn through the scouting reports that they get. Right? They're going to get a scouting report every single game that says these are your potential matchups. This is what they like to do. And they're going to learn that through their first couple of years in the league. And then they become experts on essentially every player because they played against them multiple times. So, I don't think it's a problem. I think what the problem is when you sort of pull a Dylan Brooks, right? And you go after particular players after games, and those particular players happen to be the best players in the league. I think that's when it becomes a problem. Can your game, because your game has to match your confidence. So if he's going to go out there and troll, and he's going to troll with other players that he's going to be matched up with, he's putting the pressure on himself now to go out there and bring it. Because if he does it, he's inviting guys like Chris Middleton and others to want to punish him on the floor. So that's all. I think he is feeling a little bit like Dwight Howard in sort of this weird goofiness that he's showing early on. It seems like he wants to kind of joke around. And I think it's a fine line you have to walk there, because I think you can either become sort of a likable media darling, fan darling, although in the age of social media, I think it's so hard to become a fan darling now because everybody's going to be super negative on social media and super divisive about you, especially if you want to be liked. People respond negatively to people who want to be liked. If you give that vulnerability, if you're like, hey guys, I want to be part of the club, they're like, boo, get out of here. It seems like people respond more to like, I don't know, Jimmy Butler types that are like super aggressive with everybody. But, I think it's a fine line you have to walk because you could, lose. I mean, I feel like Dwight Howard tried to goof around and he lost a lot of respect from people. So I don't know. It's interesting. It'll be something to monitor.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk about more troll jobs from Brandon Miller. We'll see if those actually come about here sooner or later. One more segment to go coming up next on the Locked On Hornets podcast.
Don't go to sleep on the Hornets just yet.
Summer camp is over. What do we think of camp? Got 7 games in. They gave us an extra one after we thought maybe they might be done. They did win a game, though, Doug. They did have one victory in their summer league session. We'll get a recap on their last game coming up next. Locked On Hornets.
Is Locked On Hornets.
Walker, sometimes you don't have to have the best package.
Okay.
Sometimes you just have to have the only package. If you wait, or this is if my dating life taught me anything, sometimes you just have to wait around long enough until you're the only thing remaining. And then suddenly you look pretty great in comparison.
It's time for more of the Locked On Hornets podcast.
All right, Doug, do we want to lead off with any comments before we get to the last game and recap some of our last second notes in Summer League? Anything that pops out to you?
A lot of fans here giving Brandon Miller the benefit of the doubt. I think they're split between believing Brandon Miller that he was trolling. I don't know how you can watch that video and think that. I mean, you could. I guess you could just blindly believe him when he says something. That's fine. If you want to have like that naive faith in human beings, that's fine. But if you watch the video, it just doesn't look like he's being tongue in cheek about it. It looks like he legitimately doesn't know who the player is. And then I think the other half of people are saying that even if he didn't know who Chris Middleton was, that's fine because they couldn't pick Chris Middleton out of a lineup. And look, Middleton is the kind of player that is sort of a, silent assassin. He's not
on a lot of commercials.
Yeah,
no,
he's not doing commercials. He's not
right.
A personality in front of the microphone. He's a guy that, he's a lunch pail guy that goes and knocks threes in your face and kicks you out of playoff series.
All right. I did speak of this win that the Hornets had this summer league session. That happened. That was an actual thing that happened. The Hornets actually got a victory. They did score 109-92 against Minnesota. 109 points this summer league session. This last game against Minnesota, 109-92. They got the dub here, Doug. What were some of the main takeaways that you had from their lone victory?
Well, last game, and they rested nearly everyone that was under contract. The only players, there was only one player that was under the two-way contract, and that's the newest two-way contract, which was Amari Bailey. They even sat Leaky Black, who also signed a two-way deal. So Miller, Jones, Smith Jr., McGowens, Bouknight, Black, they were all DNPs. So you had this crew full of players who are they're not fighting for NBA roster spots. These guys are fighting for G League roster spots, whether it be with Charlotte or auditioning for another franchise. And so it's no surprise to me that you got this group to go out there and give you 100% effort. Everybody was getting back on defense. The offense, I think, led by Bailey, was executing pretty well, passing the ball, sharing the basketball. There was none of the confusion that we had seen in the previous games. And look, a lot of the guys that were DNPs were in their, street clothes cheering on this team. But I had the thought, they got to feel, I don't think they do, honestly, but I think they should feel a little bit embarrassed that this team of future G Leaguers was out-efforting anything that we had seen in the previous 6 games. I think it has to worry you a little bit.
Well, I mean, it's not like the Timberwolves are fantastic either, though, I guess. You look to the other roster.
That's a good point. They were bad.
Look, I mean, Xavier Sneed didn't have the greatest game, 3 of 10. We did get Amari Bailey, who was Najee and Bailey, your 2 draft picks, are going to have all the eyeballs on them, right? Because those were the only 2 draft picks that played. Brandon Miller, he did not suit up in this contest. You did not have Nick Smith Jr., so it was only the last 2 draft picks that you had. Najee, 21 minutes, 5 blocks. Actually had 3 of 5 from the field with 10 points. And so defensively, Najee putting out some good numbers there.
Hold on. Before you move on, we've got to talk about your guy, Najee, okay? He was out there playing a 1995 game. I mean, he was physically punishing anyone that even sniffed the rim. If they got, he was a security alarm. If you got near the house, he was putting you on the ground. He got his 6 fouls. He earned every single one of them. Probably committed 15 fouls. only got called for 6. But I mean, that's the one thing that I wrote down, that like if this were 1995, I legitimately think Najee has a spot on this roster. He might even be starting because he's playing that old school game, that physical game that you can't play anymore. And I'm glad he played it, though, because I think it sent a signal to the coaching staff that, hey, I'm going to learn how to – I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to foul myself out of every game. But I just want you to know that I'm here for real, and I'm a physical player. And if you bring me back in a year, you're going to get this plus a more experienced guy. So I'm glad he played that way. I'm like not worried about it. But you know, you unfortunately you can't be that physical anymore in the NBA. But it was fun to watch. He was just putting guys on the ground.
Oh yeah, man. I mean, I've talked a lot about Najee. You guys know my feelings. This last game, no different. Just having 5 blocks in 21 minutes. The percentage is fantastic. The ability to guard on the perimeter, make you think when you have the basketball in the paint, and then even recover to his role man if he is helping you out on a guard that drove past you. I think he's really, really good defensively, man. I think he's really good. I was going to move on to Amari Bailey, though, because he had a great stat line. How about 7 of 14 from the field, 2 of 4 from 3-point range,
making
hit one
shots.
of his 2 free throws, 17 points, and it landed him a 2-way contract. Doug, I know you like Amari Bailey and what you've seen from him.
I really like him. I don't know that he's going to be. I think he'll be on Charlotte's bench early on, but I don't think he'll actually play, and I think he'll move to Greensboro at some point. But look, camp's going to be really interesting. You're going to have Bailey, you're going to have McGowan's, you're going to have Miller and Nick Smith Jr., and you've got Cody Martin back, maybe, all competing, I think, for wing minutes. So it's going to be really interesting, but I really like what I saw from Bailey. He was knocking down shots, which we haven't seen a ton from him, but he proved he can do it. The shot looks a little bit wonky, but I saw the shot and I said, it doesn't look very good, and it wasn't going in. But look, guys have wonky shots all the time that go in. I mean, I think LaMelo's shot's a little bit unorthodox, and he knocks it down consistently. So that was cool to see. But his game is so smooth, man. When he hits the Euro step and transition, it's just butter, man. It's so fluid. Guys like that, I just look at their game and I go, this guy can't, I don't know where his ceiling is. I don't know if he's going to be a sneak second-round all-star at some point, but it looks too smooth for him to wash out of the league at some point. I just think there's a place for him somewhere.
Well, and before we move on and end the show, just talking about Amari Bailey's three-point shooting, he did shoot 39% in college on close to 2 attempts per game. And so when you look at what he was able to do, it wasn't non-existent, right? Only 54 attempts, but that's not nothing. I don't know if that's an indicator on how well he's going to be able to shoot at the NBA, but 54 attempts from deep, it's not nothing, right? He went 4 of 4 actually to end the season, a couple of games in the NCAA tournament. We saw how valuable he was in the conference tournament. They suffered a big old injury, UCLA did, to their lead point guard, who I believe was Defensive Player of the Year in the conference. So they really relied on him quite a bit. Yeah, there's just not to say that he's an amazing shooter, right? All that to say is there's a few different ways in how he can help you, and he even showed that defensively as well, getting his hands in passing lane.
Well, and he saved the sauce for the very last play that he made. 2:14 left in this game. He spins midair in traffic into the finger roll. It's nobody's going to see it because it happened in the final game that probably not many people were watching because there weren't any of these stars. But if you go to 2:14, go to the replay on NBA.com and check this Bailey spin move midair. I knew that, he could work in traffic a little bit based on some of the tape from UCLA, but I think he did some things in this summer league that he didn't get an opportunity to show off in UCLA. And that's always a good indicator of somebody that's going to make an impact earlier than you expect. One more name I want to throw at you. I hope this guy gets a camp invite for Charlotte. And I hope, because they have 3 two-way spots now. That's a change this year from last year, which was 2 two-way spots. They've already given 2 out to Leaky Black and to Amari Bailey. So they've got one more, I think. And I hope this guy competes for it. And it's Angelo Allegri Molto bene. He looked really good. This guy, this Italian stallion out there, big guard forward combo guy who can handle the basketball. He was showing off a number of dribble moves. He was pushing the pace and got an opportunity to score a couple buckets. I really like this guy, and I was glad he made the Summer League roster, and I hope he makes the camp roster.
Yeah, a lot of good three-point performances from people. Allegri was 3 of 6. Justin Robinson hit 1. Jalen Sims went 2 of 3. Bailey, as I mentioned, 2 of 4. Kobe hit his only attempt on the game, and Xavier Sneed, Trey Scott, they both went 40% on 5 attempts. So 3-point shots, they were falling for the Charlotte Hornets to help them out with that victory. Photo finish comments, you want to go through some, Doug, as they're rolling in before we end today?
Yeah, thanks everybody for joining us here on this live edition. We had to push the recording to the afternoon, so we wanted to give you a little treat since you had to wait on the episode and do this live. Bobby says, no way, Brandon was trolling. I also don't really care if he didn't recognize Chris Middleton. So there you go. There's there's kind of the 50-50 there. Out of time says James Najee is a defensive beast.
There you
Andrew
go.
saying good afternoon, evening from England. Big fan of the channel. Topo, Andrew. Really appreciate it.
You.
Thank you, sir, from across the pond. Chase says, love how we only won after we rested all of our biggest names. I'm telling you,
Right.
It probably means nothing, but doesn't it mean something? It's just a weird look, I guess. I mean, again, it probably means nothing overall. I think it means something to the coaching staff that, hey, you couldn't get these guys, you couldn't motivate these guys who are under contract to go out there and give a great effort. Again, the roster construction too. So many of these guys that are under contract are players that probably need to be facilitated too, as opposed to being asked to facilitate a ton. So, new ownership group, a lot's going to change. I hope one thing that changes is that maybe you send a little bit more of an experienced coach down there to Summer League next year and, hey, a point guard maybe.
Yeah, that'd be nice. All right, thanks for making Locked On Hornets your first listen. Even if we weren't your first listen because we were a little later, that's okay. We won't tell anybody. Just make sure you make us your first listen next time. Make your second listen or your next one game-to-game NBA. Every moment, every top performance, every result. Locked On Game-to-Game covers every game from across the league with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast. Mitch Kupchak, Miles Bridges, they are set to speak with media on Tuesday, so we'll give you one more episode before that. Miles Bridges did release a statement. We'll talk about that statement leading into some of those comments. Then Wednesday, we'll have a recap of that presser and still plenty more to get to as we approach August. Thanks again for joining us. Have a great rest of your day.